right now on Upfront.
Ballot battle.
President Biden is going to be very weak, and I think we're going to surprise.
Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips, his 11th hour plea to the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
In Wisconsin, the land of La Follette, I thought it was pretty shocking.
His last-minute push to get on Wisconsin's presidential primary ballot. And this Sunday, he's here, one-on-one with Congressman Dean Phillips and the latest from the court. Then, hometown blitz.
I am not going anywhere.
Nikki Haley crisscrossing South Carolina this weekend, but is it already over? Wisconsinite Jason Church, a Haley campaign surrogate, is here. AI crackdown.
Because I truly believed that doing this was egregious.
Wisconsin lawmakers looking to force political ads to disclose when artificial intelligence is used.
I think it's an important bill to get across the finish line this session.
Some even pushing for jail time. One of the bill's authors, Representative Adam Nealon, is standing by. And Judge Lena Taylor.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
The longtime state senator sworn in as Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge, and she's sitting down one-on-one with Jaron, just minutes away.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. A major decision late Friday. The Wisconsin Supreme Court ordering Democratic presidential candidate Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips to appear on Wisconsin's presidential primary ballot. Phillips sued, asking the high court to take the immediate action after Wisconsin's bipartisan Presidential Preference Selection Committee, which determines whose names appear, only approved President Joe Biden for Democrats at the recommendation of State Party Chairman Ben Wickler. The court late Friday said the committee erroneously exercised its discretion. We talked with Phillips Friday afternoon, just hours before the court officially ordered his name on the ballot. How big of a success is that for your campaign?
Well, you know, Matt, first of all, it's so much less about my campaign and just so much more about how we Americans practice democracy and whether we should allow our two big parties to suppress it. It's really as simple as that. And I think you're all probably well aware that the parties dictate who goes on ballots. And in this case, I'm clearly a nationally recognized candidate running for president, a 3-term member of Congress and ranking member of the Middle East Subcommittee, former member of House leadership. And it's a little bit absurd, frankly, when a major political party and Chairman Wickler knowingly leaves a major candidate off the ballot, because it's not about him. It's not about me. It's about voters. And I just think voters in America should have the chance to vote. And it's pretty much as simple as that. The sad thing is to have to actually file a lawsuit that goes to the Wisconsin Supreme Court is an example of what candidates should not have to do. It should be much simpler than that.
The State Justice Department, as you know, argued that you and your campaign sat on your rights and arrived at this too late. Should you have filed this lawsuit earlier or just started to collect the roughly 8,000 signatures needed to get on Wisconsin's ballot?
I'm so glad you asked that, Matt. What Chairman Wickler should have done is simply put me on the ballot. And that's as simple as this needs to be. The way the game works, and I want your viewers to know, is really kind of corrupt. States who want to suppress voters and suppress candidates have a ballot, and you can actually go and get signatures to get on the ballot. 8,000 signatures, 10,000 signatures. Every state's different. But all candidates do is have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to a politically connected firm that puts people on street corners, and they sign documents trying to get someone on a ballot. It's the most ridiculous, corrupt system you can possibly imagine. I'm, again, saying the quiet part out loud, but that's how the major parties force candidates who are not the coronated candidate to spend a lot of money, waste a lot of time, and have to go through the court system to do the most simple thing in America, if you think about it. Simply put my name on the ballot. It's not rocket science. The chairman should know better, and frankly, I'm disappointed.
Wisconsin's Democratic Governor Tony Evers this past week called your push to get on the ballot ridiculous.
Well, I got to tell you, Matt, for a Democratic governor to tell Americans, especially those in Wisconsin, that putting someone on a ballot is ridiculous, I don't know what else to say. There are some times where I'm at a loss for words. I think my party is acting in a very irresponsible and dangerous manner, and I think Americans should wake up to what's really going on. When a governor says that, when a chairman of a Democratic party in a major state refuses to put someone on the ballot who's running nationally, as you well know, I think it's just shocking. Not to mention, democracy is part of our party name, and I think Governor Evers should reflect on what he just said. It is not ridiculous. What he said is ridiculous, and what the chairman did is particularly ridiculous, and it's time to wake up.
You're coming off 20% in New Hampshire. I'm curious, what is the general state of your campaign as you see it as we sit here today?
Well, the general state of my campaign is we're an insurgency. The fact of the matter is there wasn't a single Democrat with the courage to run against an incumbent president who is extraordinarily weak, a good man, but extraordinarily weak, who is likely to lose to Donald Trump. And I believe democracy requires competition. It makes everything better. American voters deserve choices. Generating 20% in just 10 weeks from zero name recognition and zero in the polls was a pretty historic achievement, and I'm very proud of it and my wonderful team. And we're gaining steam. It's not easy to take on one's party, one's incumbent president, but it's time for change. 70% of American voters don't want Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And in democracy, it's pretty darn simple. If you don't have choices, democracy dies. And I think most Americans watching this right now know exactly what I'm talking about.
Are you committing to stay in the race through at least April when Wisconsin's primary is held?
Oh, absolutely. My mission is to demonstrate to the country there's an alternative. Of course, it's hard to compete in states where you have the Democratic National Committee and National Party working against you with an incumbent president. But I will continue. I'll persevere, relying on small dollar donors all around the country who go to my website, dean24.com, to support our effort. And of course, I'm going to keep going because our country deserves another option. And increasingly, they do not want either of the leading candidates. It's important that we have options. And that's why I celebrate Nikki Haley continuing on her side of the aisle and me continuing on mine. At least we're doing what democracy demands, particularly in the light of so many people in this country, 70%, that are ready to turn the page and, frankly, to a brighter future with next generation candidates. The parties are working against that, and it's quite appalling. And I hope people start recognizing what's at risk.
Minnesota Congressman, Democratic presidential candidate Dean Phillips. Congressman, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate it.
Meantime, this weekend, Republican National Committee officials are at their winter meeting in Vegas ahead of the convention here in Milwaukee this summer. At one point, a proposed resolution would have declared former President Donald Trump the presumptive Republican nominee after wins in Iowa and New Hampshire. The resolution, though, was pulled. This as Nikki Haley continues crisscrossing her home state of South Carolina this weekend ahead of the February 24th primary. Jason Church is a retired Army captain from Wisconsin. He's a Haley campaign surrogate and supporter. He joins us now. Hey, Jason, good to see you.
Great seeing you, Matt.
First, let me just get your initial reaction to that proposed RNC resolution that appears not going anywhere at this point, that essentially would have said it's over, Trump is the nominee.
Yeah, that's honestly, it's pretty ridiculous. We have a primary system set up in this country to allow states to have their say in whatever manner they deem best fit. For the RNC to try and come in and jump the process and rob Wisconsinites of a chance to actually vote in the election in this primary, it's sad, actually. And there is reports that the former president was trying to push this, although he later went out on Truth Social and said that he wasn't. But, this again just shows that the former president is really the establishment candidate in this race. And Nikki Haley is the outsider. When you're looking at all of the Washington insiders, members of Congress coming out here and really trying to put their support out, kissing the ring a little bit, if you will, it really shows that I think Washington is disconnected from the rest of the country. 70% of Americans do not want to see a Trump-Biden rematch. We don't do coronation ceremonies here, and Nikki Haley is going to go out and show people in South Carolina and the rest of the country why she is the best person to be the president of the United States.
From your perspective, where we sit today, does she need to win South Carolina, her home state, to move on?
I think she needs to continue to show growth. She needs to continue to show support. She needs to continue to show momentum.
Under what scenario is she still in the race when Wisconsin's primary happens in April?
Look, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals about what she may decide to do down the line, but I will say this. She is growing in support. As I'm talking to Wisconsinites across the state, many of them are dissatisfied with the policies of President Biden and the former president. And Nikki Haley is providing something that is different.
What does her support look like on the ground here in Wisconsin at this point?
I'm seeing it from young professionals. I'm seeing it from people who are trying to get a home. I'm seeing it from people who are trying to get a second home to be able to accommodate children that they're having. I'm seeing it from people who understand that America just can't become an isolationist country and hide over here in the Western Hemisphere from the problems that are going across the globe, that want a leader who understands and has been really at the front line of the diplomatic end of our foreign policy fights. So I find a lot of the arguments from some of the people who are opposing her to just be disingenuous. And most Wisconsinites that I talk to that aren't necessarily involved every day in the day-to-day political politics of the state, they find her an attractive candidate.
Are they all Republicans?
They're not all Republicans. Some of them are Republicans, some of them are independent, and I've had some Democrats talk to me about that too. But an overwhelming majority of people, honestly, the election is just beginning for them. I mean, they may see an ad here or there, or they may flip on the news and hear some things every once in a while. But, you know, the presidential cycle is just picking up, and they're seeing her message, and it's beginning to resonate with them.
If Trump ends up winning the nomination, will Nikki Haley supporters here in Wisconsin vote for Trump?
You know, I don't know. I can't speak for everyone who's supporting her right now. I can say that he has certainly turned off voters in this state. We saw that in 2020.
Would you support him or vote for him?
Look, I'm struggling with some of the things that he said. I find some of the things that he has done in the past hard to stomach. I want to support the Republican nominee, but I'd have to see more out of him if he became the nominee. But my plan right now is for him to not be the nominee.
Jason Church, a surrogate to Nikki Haley's campaign here in Wisconsin. Hey, Jason, thanks so much for your time and perspective.
Thank you.
Coming up, targeting AI, Wisconsin lawmakers looking to immediately crack down on political ads ahead of the November elections. The proposed penalties. The bill's author, Representative Adam Neeland, is here next.